Kia ora, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Untidy. We're here today. We're going to welcome Jo Robertson. She's otherwise known as Sex Therapist Jo on Instagram, and we're really excited to have you on the podcast, Jo.
Thank you. I'm excited for this chat.
Yeah, it's going to be good. So you are an experienced therapist specializing in sex and relationships, addiction, betrayal, and trauma. So a bit of heavy stuff, but you're also dedicated to helping our kids grow up with healthy messaging about sex and relationships. So we've got some pretty big topics, and no doubt will trigger, certainly I noticed, like, even just preparing for this triggered in me a sense of a bit of like anxiety and apprehension, because these are really important things to cover in this conversation, but also like within our homes, to get it right for our kids, particularly if like maybe we didn't have the best start with getting educated about sex and relationships ourselves. So this is going to be a great conversation. I think everyone's going to get a lot out of this. I'm certainly going to get a lot out of this anyway for a start. So, but we want to go right back to the start and just ask you, what led you into this career path?
Oh, it's really strange, actually, because initially I thought I was going to be the Prime Minister. So,
Two viable options.
I love that so much. It's either Prime Minister or sex therapist.
yes.
Which road are we going to go down?
Yeah. So when I was studying, I thought I was going to be the Prime Minister, and I studied social policy and sociology. And then I thought, okay, I can't be the Prime Minister when I'm 21. And so what I need to do is I need to go out into the community and I need to experience the community. Like I need to know what's happening in people's lives so that I can be the Prime Minister. So then I go and I decide to do an extra year's study to train as a therapist after my undergrad. And then I started working in schools, in primary schools and high schools. And I was working, I'm going to say 90% of my kids would have been sexually abused or physically abused in the home. And so I was doing that for a number of years. And then I really wanted to keep studying. I wanted to do my master's. And I had already had two kids. I think I was pregnant with my second. And I remember painting his room and being heavily pregnant and saying to my mum, oh, I really want to do my master's, but I don't know what to do it in. And then she said, well, I think that you should study sex. And I said, that's weird. And I don't even know if you can do that. And then she said, look, you've your whole life always actually asked questions about sex. You've always been curious about relationships. You've like loved thinking about and reading about the body. So I had this real biology focus. But then she said, you've also been someone who wants to shift culture. You know, and I think that's where the Prime Minister part comes in, was challenging the way that we do things in culture and the way that we bring up our kids particularly. So she said, I think you should go and study sex, because the thing about studying while having babies is that it needs to be something that you would stay up late reading about anyway. So 100%. Great advice. And so
great advice. Love mum.
I know, she's amazing. And so then I did that. I went and I studied to be a sex therapist. You can't train in New Zealand, so I trained through Australia, and had my third child by the time that was over. And just by chance, I started seeing couples who were coming to me with lots of different issues around their sexuality, but particularly related to porn. So stuff that they'd seen online that was impacting them. And then lots of them were also worried about their kids. And so then it kind of took me into this whole kind of wider sexual culture space. And where are the messages our kids are getting from about sex and relationships? And usually that's from the internet. So what do we do about that? There you go.
Oh, crikey. So what about the environment in your home growing up? So how were conversations around sex and relationships kind of handled? Sounds like your mum's quite open, which I love.
Yes. Yeah, so I actually have a video on my Instagram of me interviewing my mum about sex through different seasons of life.
Amazing.
How do you, so was she telling you about, her sex life? Were you exchanging those types of stories?
Yeah, it's appropriate. It's not like I've never felt uncomfortable. So that's an important kind of beginning point. I've never felt uncomfortable. It's always felt healthy. it's always felt like they were offering, I would say, an aspirational view of sex, which is, sex is sometimes challenging in different seasons of life, but here are some things that can help, and here's what a really healthy sex life would look like. And they were always really open about questions. The thing with me, and this is what I encourage with other parents, is that I had a lot of questions growing up about sex, like a lot. And I was always really curious about what people were up to, but it didn't actually mean that I wanted to go and have lots of sex. Because I think often what we do with our kids and our young people is that we conflate questions with behavior, or we conflate curiosity with behavior. And we think, oh my gosh, if they're asking about this thing, it must be that they want to go and do that, or that they're doing it already. And I was really appreciative that my parents never did that. They took curiosity as is, and just, oh, okay, she wants to know more about this thing, and information is inherently never bad. So
I love that so much, because there is this kind of secretive thing around sex, right? Like, and kids are so perceptive. They understand that something happens with adults kind of behind closed doors, and it's this thing that people sort of skirt around, and they're like, what is this sex thing? And that's really great that your parents could just be open about it and just explain without being like, why are you so obsessed with sex? Because it's more like it's a curiosity thing. And there are lots of, like, I remember being quite obsessed, and I know this sounds really odd, but like just really interested in homelessness when I was young, because like I didn't understand it. And I remember being really fascinated, and I'd ask all these questions about homeless people constantly. And I think it's just a similar kind of thing. It's just that like curiosity of like, what is happening there?
Yeah.
And that's a good thing that kids have, I think. So anyway.
And also
the first tangent.
I think the first tangent, the first of many. The curiosity, I think, is so important and should be so rewarded. And I think what we need to do is remember that kids aren't coming at these questions and these topics filled with all of the knowledge of the complexities and the constructs and the conditioning that we've had. And I think sometimes for us, it can feel, the whole topic can feel really charged because of our experiences, because of our conditioning, because of social expectation, because of fears, because of our understanding of the impact that negative experiences can have. Whereas kids are just like beginner's mind. What is this thing? It's curious and fascinating, and I want to know more. And actually, it's almost starting with our energy around it. You don't want them to pick up on the energy of, oh, like you want them to pick up on the energy of like how we want them to continue on with their perception and their relationship to sex and relationships. And isn't that with creativity and curiosity and optimism and positivity? I think sometimes I have to remind myself to like separate some of the charge that I feel around some of those things with their beginner's mind curiosity. And also there are such big answers we can give, but we need to just like just pare it back to just answering the question that they've got.
Yeah, I call this brevity over breadth. So often people, often parents, like a classic example is a tampon. So parents will find a child will find a tampon, and then they'll go, "What's this?" And the parents will go into this full frenzy around how they're going to answer these questions about periods and bodies and reproduction and puberty. And it's like, you could just say, it's a tampon. And some kids will just go, okay. And then they'll wander off. And other times they might go, what's it for? And this is brevity as well. You just say, oh, adults, women, when we get a period every month, it's when we bleed out of our vaginas. So we use this kind of like a plaster. And then
they're like, okay.
Right. And there's only, you've got different personalities, and some kids will really want to deep dive on that. But we can go with brevity over breadth initially and just meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
some
Like,
caveats around that, but yeah.
yeah, like not everything has to be a big sermon, does it? Like you can just answer the question sometimes.
Yeah, it's so good. And I think, Jo, one thing that I like already, but is really helpful, is often as parents, we don't have the script and the dialogue for handling the questions, particularly if they take us by surprise, or particularly if we're handling our reaction to the question that the child is asking. So plenty of that would be great. Now you do like a lot of talks and workshops and courses, and many tailored to young people. And one that really caught our eye was the new porn landscape. Porn addiction is a very real thing. It seems really prevalent. And can you tell us a bit about this new porn landscape and the impact that you see it's having on people?
Yeah, and the reason that it's called the new porn landscape is because a lot of adults, what they have in their mind when we talk about porn is what they saw when they were teenagers. And so they might think of a magazine, they might think of a DVD. They often found things randomly in a bush somewhere. They were shown it by a cousin somewhere or an older brother or sister, so they've got these often as well, like still images in their mind, and not what porn is now. So what porn is now is, millions and millions and millions of videos and millions of, like, for example, I'll give you a stat. Like in 2019, there was 169 years of content to watch on one site.
Oh
Oh
my
my
God.
Yeah. So if you can imagine within that as well, there is a lot of diversity. So there's a lot of different types of content, but we do have the mainstream content, which is the stuff that I research and the stuff that I talk to parents, young people about. And so the majority of the content that a young person will see on a homepage of a website will be quite aggressive, will be
Mm.
usually really violent towards women. It will have a strong focus on youth. So there might be lots of schoolgirls, or, we don't know the age of those people, but there's definitely this focus on them being young. There's a lot of power dynamics, usually men having power over women, or stereotypically, really masculine men having power over kind of feminine, more subordinate men. So we've got a lot of control happening. We have very, very little consent. It's rare to see any conversation. It's rare to see affectionate behaviors. So the stuff that a young person will see will be quite different to two people just having sex in a, kind of affectionate, fun, playful, pleasurable way. They're unlikely to see that. They're unlikely to see female pleasure, really. And they're going to see a real performative, performative scene through what we call the male gaze, which is what a man might in theory want, or a male control, male dominance, female subordination, and often a lot of pain. That's painting a bleak picture, I know, but it's actually the truth.
It really is.
Yeah.
It is. All of that is true. And it is so accessible. It is
Yes.
unbelievably accessible. And this is where a lot of kids are getting the bulk of their sex education and their
Oh, it's
guidance.
terrifying.
And this is the
Absolutely terrifying.
expectation that they're going into sexual encounters with, not just boys with that expectation that that's the experience they're going to have and that's what women do, but also girls going, this is what I'm supposed to enjoy, this is what I'm supposed to offer, this is what I'm supposed to tolerate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, like it's really scary. It's really scary as as parents, that we can't control what our kids are seeing online, and it's not possible to do that. And even if we do put in some controls over, access online and stuff like that, there's going to be some kid at school that goes, oi, 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 check this out, and
Yeah,
they can't
totally.
unsee that stuff. So how can we protect them, give them a healthy perspective on sex and relationships, and how do we talk to them about some of these things that they
Yeah.
will get exposed to, may search, and then can't unsee?
Yeah, totally. So there's two pieces there. There's prevention and then there's reaction or responding. And so 'cause those are different as well, reacting and responding. So prevention looks like your kids shouldn't be on YouTube. They shouldn't be scrolling YouTube, putting stuff in, just videos auto playing. If they're going to be on a platform, maybe YouTube Kids, also a lot of question marks around that as a platform. You're relying on other platforms to deliver content that is hopefully age appropriate. And there is plenty of porn on mainstream YouTube, including illegal content. So it's not something like, don't give your kids an iPad to go into their room and watch YouTube. That is going to end badly. Put filters on your computers. Ideally, kids don't have their own devices until they're in, let's say, high school, or if they do before that, it's what we call a dummy phone, which doesn't have internet access. Filters are helpful. All of that stuff is really good to do. If your kids are on games, another example, if your kids are on games and they are on a chat function, anywhere where they can interact with someone else's content, that person can share porn with them.
Right. And just a question before you go on, so try not to lose your thread, but just a purely practical question. As parents, how can we know the list of protective measures to implement on devices? Like, if you're a bit of a technophobe, how do you know how to set these filters, how to set these controls on devices? I mean, like, it's easy enough to say to your kids, like, if you're going to be watching this thing on YouTube, like, that only happens on the TV in the lounge, or you only use the iPad in communal spaces, like, stuff's not happening in your bedroom. But in terms of, like, okay, your child has an iPad, for example, or your child has a laptop that they use for school, how do we know what to do to set them up or to put these filters in?
Yeah, I totally understand this. I don't love the idea of navigating technology myself. I find it really challenging. So there's a couple of simple options. One is, we know that iPhones are generally easier to control than an Android. However, a new Android phone has just come out that's targeted to children and young people, is really safe. So you could look at something that's already pre-set up. That's a Samsung phone. Or iPhones are generally easier. You can put way more parental controls on it, not on just an iPhone, but an iPad or an Apple device. They're a lot easier to navigate. We, as an organization, tend to recommend the filter Safe Surfer, not in any way because they pay us to or because they give us anything, but actually because they're a New Zealand company you can contact directly. So if you're having a problem, which I know lots of people do when they're inputting, new technology into a device, it's great to just be able to pick up the phone or send an email and ask for help. And so we like them as a platform because of that. We also know that they use really, really advanced technology to do what's called web crawling, and they've got machine learning models that we have a lot of trust in, because it's a really technical space. And so you want to know that you're also working with the best. So we know that interventions like filters or controls don't work well past the age of 13. So we're talking about your 12 and under cohort who still largely will just use whatever you give them. I do extra things. I have 3 boys. So the extra things that we would do, for example, outside of the home would be, I have really clear conversations with anyone whose home they're going to, because I can, lock my house down as much as I want to, but they're still going to have play dates. And so I really encourage all parents to have clear, honest conversations, because the most common place that they're going to see content, whether that's porn or violence, Like, you know, there's lots of different types of content that they might see. They might see someone self-harming. You know, it's not just sexual content, but the place that they're most likely to see that is with a friend or a cousin, or, you know, a relationship they have where that person doesn't have any controls on their devices. So we have very, very clear conversations with anyone that they're having a play date with around media and devices. There's a basically device-free playing. Otherwise, they can't go. And I had only ever really, really positive responses from parents. And I think everybody is yearning for a new environment around technology, and parents everywhere are going, how do we do this differently? And they often love when somebody else just goes, hey, here's a boundary for us, because then they also feel really safe when they send kids to your house.
So how would you bring that up? You know, like what kind of script would you use with a parent?
Yeah. So if there's someone that I know well, that's easy because I just see them at school pickup or what used to be kindy pickup, and I would just chat. They might say, hey, let's use my youngest's name because he doesn't mind being talked about. My oldest is a lot more sensitive about it. But, so let's say Danny is being invited over to a friend's house, and they say, can we come over for a play date, whatever. And I'll just say, hey, I'm a little bit obsessive about technology, you know, because of my job and because of some of the things I know. Is it okay if they just don't go on any devices while they're at your house? And that usually everybody's like, oh yes, totally, oh yeah, that's fine. And then I say, you know, and just as an added extra, is it okay if they're going to watch something, like maybe if I know they're going to put on a movie because it's like a long play date or something, can you just flick me a text and just to check that movie's okay? And then they'll usually be like, totally, that's okay. And then I always reply with, so sorry, I know this is a bit annoying, I'm just trying to do the right thing. And I think everybody gets it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it's
totally.
universally been well received, but it does take a slightly awkward moment at the beginning. Like,
Yeah.
it's a tricky one.
Oh, it is tricky, but because I guess like you don't want them to feel shame like about their choices, right? Like if they're like, oh, you know, like I let my kid watch the iPad in his room or something, and like am I a bad mom? Should I not be doing this? But and I guess like being a sex therapist, that probably works in your favor because
Yes.
people are like, well, she actually does know what she's talking about. So I might use that script and say, I've done a podcast with Jo Robertson, sex therapist. and so
Oh, totally.
so I do actually know. Yeah.
I recommend this to parents whenever I do a workshop. I say, okay, what you can do after this workshop is you can now say to your child or your teenager or your friends, hey, I went to this workshop and XYZ. So it's absolutely like you use the content that you're consuming as a reason, because that's what you should do.
Yeah.
And then how do we have these conversations with our kids about, you know, what they might see or what they might get exposed to, and, you know, what should happen then?
Yeah, so we started that particular conversation when the kids were around 4, and because they were starting to go home with other families from kindy, and I felt like it was the responsible thing for me to do to prepare them for any kind of scenario, so that they didn't feel overwhelmed, but also they get the message that I'm safe to talk to if something weird happens at someone else's house. So we talked about, obviously, you know, consent and touch and unsafe touch and confusing touch and lots of different things. But then also I said, you know, sometimes when you're at another person's house, there might be a time or a moment where you see maybe photos or a video, pictures of naked people. And they would always be like, why? You know, like, that's weird. And like, I know it is a bit strange, but some people have videos or photos like that in their house. And so if they ever, you know, were showing you a show on TV, which I know that I've already asked for them not to happen, but we all know that we can't actually control what people do in their houses. So I say, you know, maybe one day someone will decide to put a show on the TV or on their computer, and something might come up. It might be a video, it might be a picture, and it might make you feel a bit yucky, or you might be interested. That might be interesting for you. But what's important is that to know is that's not for children, and it's really important that you walk away, go play a game, or tell the adult that that's happened, or come home and tell me. And so it's really simplifying it down and making it accessible for them. And then when they are 10, so my oldest is 10, we have an explicit porn conversation where I use that word and explain what it is. But all up through that time, they're getting little pieces of information to build on. But it wasn't until he was old, like 10, that I actually said the word. But there were times when they saw really graphic images drawn on playgrounds, like really graphic stuff, really problematic, and stuff that I, was like, this is porn, but it's just a cartoon hand-drawn version, and explain to them, some people do that because they think sex is interesting, or they're trying to act older, they're trying to be cool in front of friends, and we unpack it through a variety of different questions. But by the time they're 10, you've got ideally like 6 years of snippets of conversation all building on each other. So it's not so crazy that you would all of a sudden be talking to them about sexual content.
Yeah. And in your practice, have you seen, the implications of kids being exposed to porn and the impact that that's had on them?
Yeah. I mean, I work with so many couples for whom what they've engaged with sexually, or how they've been taught even by an older sibling or a cousin or a parent, has been really, really challenging for them in establishing healthy sexual relationships with their partners. And they've grown up with ideas from what they've seen or what they've been told around how they should be, how the other person should be, what they should look like, what good sex is. And it's sometimes tragic. It sometimes has ended relationships or marriages because of what they attempt to do in their sex lives that is so damaging.
And do you think a lot of that comes down to, or some of it comes down to the neurological effects as well? Because like when you're watching porn, there's the dopamine thing. Yeah. And then when you are a chronic porn consumer, then you need more and more and more to kind of get that level of dopamine. So do you think that plays a role as well? Like rather than just, this is what I think sex is, to actually that's what I'm addicted to, and normal sex doesn't let my brain reach that same level? Is there something along there?
I mean, just real life can never compete, right? I've been with my husband, well, we've been married for nearly 14 years. Like, I don't change. I look the same. In fact, I look worse. And, 3 kids later, things aren't better than they were before. And so, and he can't change me up. And, there's only so much experimenting as well that I'm okay with. And so if he was to compare me to what was happening online, there's just no chance that I can compare to that. There's no way at all. And also I need more than somebody does online. I need kindness. I need emotional connection. A real relationship demands so much more for healthy intimacy than what they see in porn. So it just cannot compare at all. So absolutely a tolerance builds over time as well. So the more content you consume. And I know that based like truly on my own experience as well, because I've spent 7 years researching porn and different types of sexual content. And my tolerance changes the more time I spend in the space. And so if I haven't done any research on sites for a few months, when I jump on, I'll be like, whoa, this is so intense. And it's quite like overwhelming, like overstimulating. And I'm really sensitive to it. And then if I do, a couple of weeks of research, then at the end of that, it's just like same old, same old. And I never believed that before. When people told me, I was like, I don't know, it's still really intense content. And then it happened to me, and it happened so many times. I was like, wow, this is so interesting. You do.
Yeah. And like what really strikes me about porn is like when you go onto a standard kind of porn site or whatever, the amount of like step family
Yeah.
content that is on
Oh.
there is absolutely out of control. And it's like every video is like a family scenario.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, what is that doing to young people as well? Like, if they think that's normal, like, do they think, filming their sister or whatever, or like filming someone or their stepsister or someone in their family is normal?
Yeah.
That's got to mess with young minds too, right? It's
Yeah.
just horrifying,
Yeah, absolutely.
and it becomes normalized.
It's been normalized, and it's been a growing trend for the last 5 years. So at the beginning of my research journey 7 years ago, you didn't really see that. And then we started to see
Mm.
more of it about 5 years ago, and it only increased. There's lots of theories around that. The most dominant theory is that we saw more ancestral content on TV shows. And so there was Game of Thrones, and then there was another one where there was incest, and I can't remember what it was called. But the porn industry always goes a step more than mainstream content. So that's one theory. We don't know that for sure. We don't know if that's causative or anything. But whatever's happening in the world, we do tend to see reflected on the sites and amplified. But yeah, absolutely. So the normalization of sexual violence and what we call the eroticization. So not only is it just okay and normal, but it's also appealing and arousing. And that's even more damaging. There's so much research now to say that what people see impacts what they do and their attitudes, just in the same way as, we took smoking out of movies for a reason. We took it out of TV shows for a reason. And that's because we knew it had an impact on what people consumed. And so it's the same thing, but we seem to not be as comfortable with that conversation. We don't want to believe in the same way that it's creating such an impact. We seem to be more comfortable with it on other topics, but less on this one.
Right. And you can't blame people. We've all been there for curiosity about sex, wanting to learn about it, wanting to know how it works, what you do, how to be good at it. Like that's completely natural, and that's absolutely fine. But there's going to be curiosity far beyond what teens are willing to speak to their parents about or their sex educators about at school. So while there's a terrible trend of them getting this information from porn sites, what resources do you recommend for young people to actually access that is going to give them a healthy and realistic view of sex and relationships and give them enough of the information that they're desiring?
Yeah, there's lots of good websites now, and it doesn't actually take too much to find them. But I like a slightly boring but very, very informative, based on science, and also written in lay people terms, like really easy, accessible, is Healthline. It's amazing how much great content is on there. There's another one called Bish, bish.co.uk. There's another one called this is usually for girls who feel more comfortable with this platform, but Clue, the period app.
Mm-hmm.
They have what they call an encyclopedia on their website, and there's so much content about sex on there and how to make it better, how to what to do if it's painful, how to do certain things like try certain positions, etc. There's actually a lot of content now that there wasn't before, but we don't often provide that. So we're just like hoping that teenagers will try and search for that content, but we don't give them the websites. So I feel the same about kids. So for example, we have books in the house that talk about sex, and they're age appropriate for our kids. But it means that at any stage, at any random night, any, quiet time, they could pick up a few different books about sex and read them just by themselves. And I'm normalizing the fact that they might want to read a book about that. And so that's why it's just in the house. But I'm also hoping that they, get information consistently, because that's what makes the biggest difference. So sex chats should never be one and done, because they'll forget 90% of what you say.
Well, I guess like you're in such a horribly uncomfortable moment, like when your parents are like, right, let's sit down and talk about sex. That I feel like you're not in a yeah, okay, I'm gonna take in all the information, because it's like if that's the first moment that you have talked to your parents about sex, and then you're getting all the information at once, and it's so odd and uncomfortable for everyone that it's not really like a learning moment, is it? Like
Environment.
you're
It's
not
hard to
really
absorb.
open to, yeah, it's very hard
Well,
to absorb.
some kids will be absolutely loving it. So
Mm.
my oldest is what I call a lighthouse, which is where they just have so many questions and they like scanning for information everywhere they go. And then they find something that they want to know about and they just like hone in, go deep dive, like you, Matilda, on homelessness.
Yeah, yeah. They find something
Yeah.
and they want to know every aspect of it. Very complicated issues.
So my son, my oldest, is that way inclined. So when I talk to him about sex, he's just all about it. Like all the information wants to consume as much as possible. But my middle child is much more reserved, reflective, doesn't want to have a whole big chat. So we rely more on books and short, brief chats with him. Whereas with my oldest, it's like he could probably sit there for quite a long time and have a deep conversation. But again, they'll forget. So I had this conversation with my middle boy about sex explicitly, penises and vaginas and all the things. And when he was 8, and then about 3 weeks later, I raised it again, and he'd forgotten the whole thing. The whole thing.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I was like, do you remember when we talked about sex? And then he said, what's that? And I was like, no. And so then we go in again, and he's going to forget 90% of that chat. And so we go in again, and he's going to get little pieces more and more over time. But yes, it's not the most conducive, often, conversation to remember everything about, because they might be slightly tense, or you might be slightly tense. But it's definitely they're not going to get the information they need if we just think, oh, I've had that chat and now I'm finished.
Yeah. Well, it's so great that we have all of these assets that we can use now, because do you guys remember back in the day, all we really had was girlfriend sealed section?
Yep.
Do you remember that?
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I remember finding one maybe of my sisters or like a friend, and it had been opened, and I was like, oh my gosh, you
Yes.
have read the sealed section, and it was like this huge, huge deal. And that's all that's all the information we got, really.
Just was always focused on like how to give a good hand job, like how to let him keep, like how to keep him, how to make sure he doesn't cheat. It was so bad.
So bad.
Yeah.
And the fact that it was sealed off is what I was going to say, is that like it's supposed to be secretive and, and kind of inaccessible, and that maybe you shouldn't be looking. Like, that's bullshit. This is just part of life.
Yeah.
Like it needs to be accessible because it's part of life. And also, like, on that note, Jo, that things are mostly skewed towards men's experience and men's pleasure, in a sort of heteronormative scenario for sex. What about where can girls go to, or people who identify as girls, where can they go to learn about pleasure and their experience and their rights, and how they should enter that sexual landscape?
Well, all of those sites will do both. So, here's what makes a penis feel great. Here's what makes a vulva feel great. What's the clitoris, and what's the best way to stimulate it. And so all of those platforms that I talked about will do that. And so that's so important that we actually provide that information. If you're an adult and you want to engage in just slightly higher level of information around your own pleasure, then there is a site that is known to have really successful outcomes for women feeling more confident about their bodies and how to get pleasure themselves. And that's OMG Yes. And they have educational videos on how to experience pleasure. It is nothing like porn, and I want to make that super clear because I definitely know the difference. It is focused on science and focused on education and empowering women to understand their own bodies. So yeah, I would recommend looking at that if you feel comfortable. There's a lot more information now, but we do tend to have to go looking for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the books that you were referencing for, younger kids, the
Yep.
sort of tween stage, I guess.
Yep.
What would you recommend for parents are good books?
Yeah, cool. So I actually have a parenting course, so where I talk about how to discuss all of these different topics, and I have a whole comprehensive book list in there. And so there's that. So that's called Tricky Chats Parenting. And then if you just want to buy a couple of books now, there's a great one called Where Willy Went, and that's for your
It's
7
a
and
brilliant
unders.
name.
Yeah. That's great for your 7 and unders. And then over that age, so your 8 plus, they want the specifics, and they're definitely ready for the specifics. The amazing true story of how babies are made is really good. And then if you want inclusive, gender neutral, and not focused on heterosexual relationships, so you want them to be really open, then What Makes a Baby, and all books by Corey Silverberg are really good, but they're not going to go into the specifics in the same way that The Amazing True Story of What Makes a Baby does.
Okay,
Cool.
That's awesome. That's really helpful. And we see a lot of discussion in like online parenting circles around play dates and sleepovers. And some people are kind of against, their child having unsupervised time with at other people's houses. But then also, you don't want to rob kids of that
Yeah.
experience of having play dates and sleepovers because they're fun. But we can't control necessarily that environment. So how do we keep our kids safe? What would you advise parents?
So this is a really big topic, and there's lots and lots of ingredients that we would go to. I call play dates like baking a really good cake, and you want to put all the right ingredients in there to make sure it's super yummy and fun. And then sleepovers are like a double layered cake because there's way more time that they're getting at someone else's house. You won't really find a lot of professionals who support sleepovers. So there will be very, very few professionals in my space where we've dealt with trauma who will encourage it. And so I'm not saying that means you can't do it. There are some things to make it safer. For example, it's usually safer if children sleep in the lounge than in the bedroom. So if you think open spaces are safer than closed spaces. And you should feel really, really, really confident in those people. So it should be your top 2 friends, not necessarily their top 2 friends. So we have very specific people that they are sometimes allowed to have sleepovers with in our family. And those sleepovers will happen in quite specific ways as well. So they're really well managed. But in terms of play dates, then yeah, you want to have ideally gone to that house yourself prior. And the reason I say that is because you don't really know the dynamics of a household until you're there, do you? Like, you don't know if there's an older brother there who sits in games the whole time. Like, you don't know that until you've been in the context. You don't know if 7 different adults live in that home. And the more adults live in a home, unfortunately, there is more risk to the child. And I know that's not comfortable, but it's just the facts. And so you want to be there at least once to get a sense of it. And then you want to have really clear conversations around what's okay with the actual parent. Then you also want to do a deep dive with your children multiple times, because remember, they'll forget 90%, on what is and isn't safe at people's houses. So you want to be really clear around touch. You want to be really clear around consent. You want to be really clear around devices. And so I'll have my boys are very, they're really schooled up on this stuff. It doesn't mean that when they're at playdates, everything goes perfectly, but it does mean that when they come home, they'll tell me about it. So stuff still goes wrong and things that I wouldn't choose in my own home, but then they come home, they can tell me about it, and we can have a big debrief and a chat. And so having those specific conversations means that they know you're safe to come home to. You always, typical things like you want to use code words. You might want to do intentional check-in, like phone calls. So some parents say, hey, I'm going to call you at 3:30 after school and just make sure you're feeling okay. Or if they're doing a sleepover, hey, I'm going to call you at 7 and then I might call at 9 as well and just check you're okay. So you're not waiting for them to initiate. If you can imagine, it's much harder for a child to raise something than to just say yes. So it's much harder for them to go to the parents and go, hey, I actually really want to go home. Can you call my mum or dad? Than if you call and say, do you want to come home or are you okay? So we often leave a lot of responsibility to the child when we need to step up. Those are just a few things.
Yeah.
But again, those are stuff that we do cover in the course and give pretty significant instructions around just and this is I'm not super intense. I actually give my kids a lot of freedom. I'm actually quite big on risk, but not risk with people I don't know, but risk like they could climb literally a mountain and I would be like all for it. And they live a risky life in other areas so that they don't feel constrained all the time. But where it comes to other people and safety, like sexual safety and emotional safety, then yeah, we've got a lot of structure there.
That makes so much sense. And then what about, say you and your partner have differing views around it? You know, there's one that's like, oh, it's fine, don't be so controlling, blah, blah, blah. And then the other one really wants to have firm boundaries around that. How do you suggest navigating that within the marriage?
Yeah, that's really tough. So you're really dealing with two different parenting styles. If somebody can get there or can do Zooms, there's really great parenting coaches at Parenting Place, and we've used them ourselves where we're trying to navigate stuff. And I believe that it's $80 for a session, but that they will also do them for those who can't afford. And so it's really accessible, but you can actually have conversations about your specific issues in your relationship. So we've had differences of opinion over the years, Dave and I, about how to deal with particular behaviors. So we've always gone and talked about it with a professional. Outside of that, I would recommend you make a little plan around both of you doing some reading if you're both up for that. And then there might be a negotiation. And you might not get everything you want, just like in every relationship. You might not get everything you feel you just your way. But that's just life, and that is relationships. I think what's important is that you could do one of two things here. You deliver a cohesive front to your children, like, hey, me and X, whoever your parenting partner is, have decided blah, 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 blah. You can say in a respectful way, let's say it's Dave and I, hey, Dad thinks this, this, this. I'm feeling this, this, this. And so we've decided to let you do X, Y, Z, but I just want you to know what I'm worried about. So you're not throwing anyone under the bus, but you're being respectful, but you're highlighting to your child where you think the boundaries should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, crikey.
There's a lot.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Yeah, because I feel like maybe how we were, like, a lot of our parenting styles come down to our experiences as a child as well. Like if we had a scenario in a sleepover that was uncomfortable, or like if there was a moment where we felt powerless and didn't know what to do or whatever, that can really affect how you parent your child, and it's a really tricky one to navigate. Like, do you err on the side of worst case scenario, because like worst case is catastrophic, that can that's something that your child have to deal with for the rest of their life. It's
totally.
God, it is really tricky.
Where I have more experience, I'll make the call. Where Dave has more experience, he will make the call. So we base our decisions around parenting often on our expertise in that thing.
Yeah, I love that. That's really good advice.
It's hard to kind of go there, but if you're a parent and you become aware that something has happened to your child, or you're concerned about an experience that you suspect they might have had, or an encounter that could have been confusing or difficult or painful or dangerous. What do you do?
Yeah, so that's two different things. One is you've got an intuition that you're kind of suspecting something, and then the other is sounds like they've maybe disclosed. When it comes to a disclosure, what's most important is that you stay really calm. Often what we do is we introduce all our own feelings, and we then can consume the space. And what our job is to hold the space tightly for them so that they can do all of their feelings without feeling like they've negatively impacted us. They don't need it. They can't take that on. So we stay really calm. We ask questions, but ideally not leading questions like, hey, can you show me where they touched, as opposed to, did they touch your penis? That's a leading question. So staying open, and then you ask them, what would you like me to do? Who do you feel comfortable with me telling? What do you want to never see that person again, which is totally fine? Do you want us to talk to them? You give them some power. So, and that might be a scenario. Recently, a client, they had, it was a 6 and a 7-year-old, and they were cousins, and there had been some unsafe touching, and it had been multiple times as well. And so the child for whom was touched is now not spending any time with that other child. And so they are not taking the child to family gatherings or dinners or birthday parties, because they're giving her all the power in determining what she wants, and not going, oh, you just kind of need to, move through this because it's our family. So we give them power. We give them some tools, which might be, when you remember it, you want to do some big deep breathing. You say this to yourself, think about this place or this picture. There's some strategies you can use around just general anxiety. When you've got a gut instinct that someone is not safe or something's going wrong, you should always follow your intuition. So intuition is almost always right. And so, for an example of this, is like in youth work or in social work environments, if they're looking at employing someone, they will always follow their intuition. That even if someone presents well on paper and they say the right things, if there's a gut feeling that something's not quite right, they follow that, because that's our body communicating something's unsafe. And so we want to teach our kids also to follow that instinct, encourage them to listen to their intuition and follow it where they can. And you do the same.
That's really helpful. Can you tell us a little bit about the Make Sense campaign?
Oh, yeah. So I've shared that I, researched porn for many, many, many years. And what I was largely researching was mainstream content. And then I started to see an increase in illegal content. So that is specifically, just want to make sure that if you've got a kid if you've got kids in your car at the moment or in the kitchen, then you might want to turn the sound down. But specifically, that's bestiality, rape, and child sexual abuse material. So they're, in our law, they're considered illegal images and videos. So we were seeing a growth in that, but in response, a complete lack of action. So we've not changed the way that we manage child sexual abuse material, what people used to call child porn. We've not changed the way we manage that since 2010. So even though we've seen like a dramatic increase, our technology is not any more advanced than it was 14 years ago. And then we do nothing at all in any way around bestiality content and rape videos. So they're all just there, free to access.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And most people don't know that. And they think, oh yeah, surely like the government's kind of like doing something about it, but they're not. And so we decided, my colleague Holly Brooker and I decided to start advocating and campaigning around this space. And we've had a petition around increasing the block list or the filter, advancing the technology and putting other illegal genres in there. And that's going to Parliament in April. And then it'll go select committee and we'll hear their outcomes a few months later.
Surely that will do something, because I mean, it's just absurd that that is the case at the moment. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So the things that they can do to help, like, do they have the tech available to be able to block this stuff?
There is tech available. So there definitely are things they could do, quite simple things actually, that where they could adopt other countries' block lists, or they could develop a machine learning model. We've even offered to do that, and they have pushed back on that. And there are things that they could do that they're not. Yeah.
Oh God, that's grim, isn't it? And how if people really want to help with that, how, like, is there a way they can join the movement?
Yeah, I mean, we've just closed the petition, so that was the primary way. When that was going, that was the primary way of people supporting. But it sounds really cliche, but honestly, the more conversations you have, the better. And if you send even the really, really basic email to your MP, they actually have to read it and they have to listen to you, because you're one of their constituents, and they have to respond to community concern. And one of the issues here has been that the community has not been aware. So the country has not known what's happening and what isn't happening. And so there hasn't been a public rallying cry like, hey, do more, because people just haven't known. And so have conversations with your friends, send a simple email to your MP or to the minister. So here the minister would be the DIA, Minister Brooke Van Velden. And it's actually really easy to do that. Like, you just literally send an email to the email address that's on their website, and all of that has to be processed. And so it sounds like, oh, it wouldn't make a difference, but can you imagine if she received 1,000 emails? Like, can you imagine if she received 1,000 emails from the community and thought, oh gosh, a lot of people actually care about this, I probably should say something or do something. That's quite impactful.
That's fantastic. And I think, throughout this conversation, there's a lot to be aware of. There's a lot to be concerned about. There's a lot of action that we feel like we need to take as parents, and it always feels like there's a lot to be concerned about. But do you think that with parents in this generation taking a more aware, proactive approach to their children's first encounters with, learning about sex and sexuality and relationships, and trying to have more open conversations, that you're seeing a positive impact on that, and that we can be optimistic about our kids' futures and relationships?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't be in this space if I wasn't optimistic. And I see it in our own family. When we have conversations that we've been building on for years, but the depth of relationship that you can create, and the support that you can offer them in their adolescent years, when you've kind of built the foundation in those earlier years, is just so great.
Absolutely. And through having these conversations, do you see, I mean, even amongst your kids or other teens that you're exposed to, that they are able to make more conscious choices about what they're consuming?
Yeah, we're actually seeing more young people say, no, I don't want anything to do with the porn that's out there, because it's unethical. It's harming people, and in real life, like, people are being harmed on the video, and it's harming us and our generation. But they can't make that decision unless we tell them, what the risks are, or what the content, what some of the problems with the content is. So having the conversation means that they might make that decision for themselves, which is really amazing. We might see a whole cultural shift happening based off these parents talking about it with their kids.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Oh, okay. I feel a bit better.
I feel quite emotional after this talk. Like, I feel like after I might even start crying for some reason. I think I'm just because, like, we're entering into this time, and I just feel it's like scary as a parent to think like this, it could happen, Oh my God, I'm getting emotional. Sorry. Oh gosh, it's just
No, but it's all right. I mean, we want to protect our kids.
Yeah. Yeah. You just want to do the best you can, right? And you just want to, like, they're the most precious things in the world, and these types of conversations, while they can be confronting and sometimes a little bit sort of uh, uncomfortable at times, is so important. And the more that we can get more parents empowered with the knowledge, then, like you're saying, this cultural shift can happen, and we'll have a healthier generation, I guess,
Yeah.
that can navigate this hectic online world. But if people want to work with you, how do they, like, what are some of the options that you give for
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, so I put out a lot of information on Instagram, and so it's lots of resources. So I have Tricky Chats Parenting, and then I also have Sex Therapist Jo, where I just treat it as a resource space, really. So it's just shared information, tips, strategies. If they want to contact me directly, if they've got some concerns about stuff that's happening with their kids, let's say jorobertson.org, then they can jump on there, and I sometimes do parent consultations. If they want to get kind of tips and strategies on all the stuff we've talked about, including filters and online grooming, how to manage gaming platforms, all of that stuff, then trickychatsparenting.com, the course there is specifically designed for parents of 5 to 10 year olds. But if you've never had any of these conversations and your child is 12, for example, then I would recommend watching it. And I do lots of the scripts, like you've said, like, what's your script for that? So I try to input as many scripts as possible. So those are the three kind of best platforms for help at the moment.
That's fantastic. And
Awesome.
we'll put all of the resources that we've discussed in this into the show notes. So if anybody wants to access links to that, just go to the show notes in your podcast listening app and you'll be able to get it there. Jo, this has been a really great conversation. Big, confronting. I think I'm going to go take the dog for a walk and decompress now. But I think also, I don't want to forget that sometimes we're so conscious of doing this right, and sometimes that comes with a sense of pressure and anxiety that, my God, we just want to do this right. But if you're open to just building on those little conversations with your kids and just keeping those doors open for communication, that in fact they will be okay, and we can trust that they will develop those skills of discernment in themselves as well. And I think sometimes we have to remember, like, if we put in that groundwork with them, that we can trust that our kids will be okay, and if they need help, that they will come to us, and we can make it easy for them, and just not to lose the hope that yes, there is all this stuff out there, there is all this danger out there, but we can make it as safe a place as possible, and we can work together with them. And just to remember that, in fact, the future is hopeful because we are having confronting conversations now.
Yeah,
absolutely. Oh, Jo,
thanks so much for your time, Jo.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Really enjoyed it. And such valuable information. We can't wait to share it with everybody.
And fingers crossed for the petition. I am going to be emailing my local MP this weekend. And so, thanks, Jo. Really appreciate it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Untidy. If you enjoyed it, we would really love your help to support us to continue to make the show. Things you can do that make a huge difference is subscribing to the show so you never miss an episode. You can also leave us a little 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And of course, please share this podcast with your mates. It means that we can continue to build this community, keep putting out untidy episodes, and just keep doing what we love to do.
And don't forget to check out mybigmoments.com for kids' books that make your tricky job of parenting just a whole lot easier. Untidy listeners get a discount at checkout, so just pop in Untidy for 10% off your order when you check out. And lastly, we would like to thank all of the good people that make this podcast possible: Flicker Williams and Joe Rocker at My Big Moments for the beautiful artwork and design, and Maxine London Creative for editing this episode. Thank you so much, guys. Take care. We'll see you soon. Mā te wā.